Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And it's Jeremy from Tested.
Welcome to Projections, our show about virtual reality, augmented reality, and all the amazing places it'll take us. Took us to a pretty cool place this morning.
Yeah, it was a very cool place. We went to a location-based VR company, Nomadic. Now they are developing experiences that they will sell to locations that they can maybe fill empty spaces with, or spaces that are no longer used, with VR environments, real-world structures that get transformed in a tracked VR world experience that you might be in for 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's almost like a paradox in some sense. The promise of VR is that it can take you anywhere, but you're also confined by the physical setup that you have in your home. Room scale or just standing scale 360. Consumer VR is limited by a lot of that.
But more importantly, like what's tangible, right?
Exactly.
Like in a home environment, you need a wide open space. Like all the instructions for the headset say, clear the space, make a 5 foot by 8 foot space and have nothing in it. They are saying yes, but if it's a controlled environment, you can actually have the real world represented in VR in a way that is super compelling.
Yeah, so what is the thing that's going to get people to go to a location where they would have spent money on laser tag, an escape room, a go-kart experience, and go with their friends and spend some money to spend 10, 20 minutes in VR? There's a company in Utah, The Void, that's doing just that, and this is similar. But I think the best way to explain it is to show you the demo we got and the conversation we had with two of their leads about location-based VR, and we'll jump to our impressions.
Nomadic VR is a VR company, and we make tactile, physical, modular environments, and then we map digital worlds on them. So we are an out-of-home, location-based VR experience that we think is just more immersive and more compelling than any other kind of VR experience. My name is Jim Preston, and I'm the executive producer at Nomadic.
And I'm John Duncan. I'm the head of physical production here, building all the props and interactive pieces that people will experience in our exhibits.
So this is location-based VR. People aren't playing this in their home. They're going to what type of location? Like a mall, a theater?
Yeah, exactly. A mall, a theater. It could even be mobile. Potentially down the road, where you could put it in, into a rig or 18-wheeler or something like that. But we really are aiming for malls, food courts, movie theaters that want to use their floor space in different ways to try and generate more revenue, get more foot traffic, bring more different experiences that could also potentially be tied to some of the other movies or some of the other entertainments that's going on in that space.
And you can use the same space to create multiple experiences.
Exactly right. So, one of the things that we're really proud of and that we really want to master is the modularity of our environments. So our environments have a sort of a Lego-like quality. So we could go into different locations that have a different footprint, and they have something that may be much more rectangular, and they want an experience that is, a 40 by 80 sort of thing. We can create an environment that fits that space. Or if someone had something that's quite square in the middle of a food court, for example, and they want something that's 50 by 50, we could also, support that space as well and put together these modular physical environments, and then the digital environment can be mapped to that as well. So within that same environment, you can have multiple different experiences, right? You could go through something that could be a gritty neo-noir sort of experience, or you can go through something that is much more relaxing and fantasy-like, but it's the same physical layout, but the digital is completely different.
In home consumer VR, we hear at the high end, it's room scale.
Right.
Your 5 meter by 5 meter space, but game developers making content for that can't rely on the user having all that space. They have to kind of configure their software environments to scale to small or big. Here, it's modular, but is there a base minimum space that you work out of as you're creating demos, being able to control end to end the location, the room and the software, what type of experiences can someone using this experience?
Well, we're considering it sort of warehouse space, that kind of scale. So, we're sort of working with a 40-foot by 60-foot Optum at the moment, but it can be adjusted in or out for whatever locations we find. And then once that's set, then all the interior volume, that can all just be rearranged every few months so that we can have a new experience coming in, coming out, and keeping it all fresh so that people want to keep coming back, try out the new experience when it hits the market, and keeping things fresh.
And you're not using your own tracking solutions, you're buying those from a third party.
Right.
Your expertise is in doing a software that connects peripherals to the entire world.
Right. We're
as
sort
well
of
as sensors.
piecing it all together.
Right.
So we're using, we're not headset manufacturers, we're not computer manufacturers, we're not tracking manufacturers. We get those from all of our different vendors and sources, but we're taking all that and making it all work together to make our experiences as immersive as we can possibly make it.
So from a fabrication standpoint, as you guys were starting and creating this first demo, what were the things that you experimented with? How many props did you want people to interact with? What were the constraints of building a big environment out of a less big environment, even though it's still 40 by 60?
Yeah, well, we started off, we had to build everything ourselves. Like, we built our first backpacks ourselves because nobody had a backpack on the market because we started a while back. So our first ones, we just got a high-powered laptop that had a desktop processor in it, and we built our own case for it and everything. But we don't want to be having to do that. So now that other companies have come along, MSI, Zotac, and some of these, we can buy off the shelf. And that way, as new ones come on the market that are better and faster and cheaper, we can leverage that and use those. So we're not tying ourselves to a particular product. Or making it ourselves and having to deal with those costs.
And then in terms of to use the Lego analogy, the Lego pieces you're building, that goes from hand props that you have on the table here to the actual physical structures. Can you talk about some of these props and environments that you're making?
Sure. Like, basically, you start off with a big empty room. So all the locations will have their space that has our grid floor and the tracking system that's built into it. And so we can show up with our kit of parts, and we arrange all the walls. They fit into a certain Lego pattern that all perfectly lines up with the digital world, so that we come in, set our walls in all the different locations they need to be in, set all the props in place. They load new software, and you're off and running on a new experience. And then every few months, we can come in, rearrange the walls, add some new props, load new software. Boom, you got another experience, so that it can tie in with some other thing that's happening.
So I know, like, if I'm using Unity or Unreal or something, and I'm designing, my walls can literally snap to a grid.
Yeah.
And you align that snapping to the real world. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Holes in the ground pegs. And
we have a provisional patent on that right now, so that our walls, our wall system, the alignment of the wall system and the digital world and the real world, that all matches up, makes life easier.
I'm curious about your design process, because you said that you take a real world and then you map a new environment, like a VR environment on top of it. But don't you start?
It actually kind of works the opposite way.
So you imagine
I work in the physical world, so
Right.
of course I'm focused on my world.
Okay.
But we have our creative department come up with a cool idea for an experience, and we kind of let them run with ideas of what they want to happen in it.
Yeah.
And then they can use the whole snapping system to build the world, and then that makes it easier. We know exactly what we need to build in the physical world, so that people have what they need to interact with.
So how do you use those prototypes before you have a real world to actually walk through? How do you develop?
You want to take that one?
Yeah, really at this early stage, this is the prototype stage.
Yeah,
This
sure.
is the question, you're just asking questions and coming up with answers, right? So it's very much like, hey, we would do a plank. Where would we put it? What did the experience be? Let's try to put it in there. The elevator sort of thing. You kind of just try modular, and you ask this question, is this compelling? Let's go down in there, let's put it in, and let's try it. And it's very much just get a feel, put people through it, and see what they think. It's, what we have now is really just a bunch of strung together answers to questions like, is it compelling to pull a gun out and just go through the door and feel the wind on your face, that sort of thing. Walk across a plank, go into the elevator, the shaking elevator, all of that stuff. We're in the very early stages of like really what is interesting and what is exciting, and it's try something, check it in, literally walk downstairs and try it in the booth.
Yeah. But as we develop ideas, because we have guys that let's do this kind of experience, and so We have Alex Mathis upstairs who's been doing some really amazing, like just test things out. We had an idea for something, and so he did what we call a white box version of it, and he just built it out in sort of a basic thing so he could come down to our stage here, use the tracking system with no props, no walls, nothing, just to try walking through it, just to see if it, what it felt like to walk through that world. And then as that develops, you can go, okay, I can change this or I can change that to make it work better. And then, as that develops, then we start building the props and building the walls so that it's just an evolutionary process. It's a lot like, any other like movie or game sort of thing where you just keep evolving it.
Right, but with a game you can iterate in software, and
right.
it can be an afternoon to change an entire room, or
Right.
at least the size of it.
And you can do that with this too.
Yeah, I suppose with your grid system maybe that's possible.
And so as they develop it, they can keep iterating, and then at a certain point, you have to kind of lock it in.
Right.
But it's because we need lead time to build things. But
And you make a good point. It's not just the grid system, right? The filing cabinet is freestanding.
Yeah.
Right? That's an object in the world that's going to have in this case, it's built in Unreal. That's got to be marked up as a physical object that actually has collision and things like that, right?
And that's the interesting thing, like in the first room we walked into, there are many things, like I felt like the most interactivity we got in terms of tangible things we touch was in that first room to acclimate the user to the fact that you can touch things like the railing and you can poke your head out a window.
Right.
Are these things also part of like a modular package? Like when I go to a store, to use the Lego analogy again,
Sure.
if I buy a box, I know I have a certain number of pieces, certain number of things that I can build a structure out of. Is that the idea here where you give a developer, you have in this package, X number of walls with windows, X number of box-like things that are tracked, cabinet-type shapes that are tracked?
Yeah, with external developers, they'll definitely need lines to paint within. Are there railings? Because if you have railings, you're probably in a particular kind of world, right? And so all of these things are the kind of, are there windows that suggest, and if there's wind and heat and all that sort of stuff, that will sort of constrain them. So it's unlikely that we'll have sort of just a blue sky thing for external developers, because it is a challenge to be off-site and not have access to the booth, right? And to still try and develop in parallel. And then that's something that, they'll probably have props on site and they might have smaller portions of the actual booth, but it is definitely a challenge. And I think that what we do here at Nomadic is not only will we be creating our own experiences, but we'll help define what makes for that compelling experience. Because part of what we're doing is we're learning right now, and we're asking people, for example, when you came out, I asked, did you miss your hands, right? And what is that level of expectation? Shooting the crows is a great example. Like you give people a gun and you put crows in the world. Before long, people are going to take shots at the crows, right? And what are the things that people expect to be there? Because once you deliver on a promise, that door handle is real. That railing is real. That heat is real. And how long do you have to keep delivering on that promise, right? You can't break that, right? You kind of break a contract to the player if you suggest a physicality. For example, when you moved the plank and you found that it was tracked, that is really compelling. Like, this is really here in the world, right? This is an object I'm going to clip through. And we're still at that stage of learning of, like, what do people expect when they go through a world that is so tangible, that's so physical? And as someone who comes from the video game space, we're all used to glass tubes. We're all used at some point, it's like you hit that wall and you're like, oh, I guess the developers didn't want me to go this way. And it's kind of annoying in video games, but it doesn't break you out of a video game. That could be something that really breaks you out of the experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your world, the real world, the structures, they have to feel real, but they don't have to look real. That's an interesting restraint to have to work with.
One of the questions that I really want an answer to is, do the walls have to have a demonstrably different texture than the actual digital? Like, if the digital is a brick texture on the wall, but the wall in there is like drywall,
right?
How jarring is that?
How much is enough?
Yeah, exactly.
I felt like the shapes, in my experience, I did a lot of feeling around to see, like, that looks like a curved, but is it actually a right angle in real life? And I would reach around, and what's the diameter of those railings? Like, and
you were really checking
the windowsills.
Right, exactly. And how many layers did you actually go to mirror what I saw in the real world?
It's just like in a video game. Like, every time you start a video game, you're born again, and you're always asking, does fire hurt me? Can I take falling damage in this game?
Right.
Is there friendly fire? All the stuff that us as video gamers go through every time we start a new game, it's going to be the same thing in this world. And we have to think through all of those, because if you ask this question of, like, is this thing really here? And the answer is no. For example, the pizza in that experience is not there, and it's actually meant to discourage you from putting your hand through it.
Yeah.
But there are some people who put their hand through the pizza. Or, for example, closing, like Norm, or closing the door on the filing cabinet. You closed the door. Norm didn't. Norm went through a few times. You never closed the door. You picked up a gun, you walked away. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just behavioral things. It's very interesting.
It is fascinating
people-
watching human behavior in the game.
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily how they would behave in the real world, is maybe what they expect. You bring a lot of expectations coming from people who play video games.
Because we want to have so much natural mapping, that's why there's a gun. It really does look and feel and shape. This really does look and feel.
Yeah.
That natural mapping, then we don't have to worry about teaching you button presses. We don't have to worry about teaching you things.
And I think that really keeps people in the game too. When they touch all the things and they can feel like, oh, I'm actually here. When you first start the game, you feel like, okay, I'm in a game, my brain's telling me I'm in a game, it's not really real. But the more things you touch, the more things you interact with in a natural fashion, the less loud that voice gets, so that by the time you get to the plank or you get to something else, you feel like, I could actually die. And so that's what we're trying to do, is like get as much of that lizard brain to believe that what it's seeing is real.
And also divide the expectations. Like, as gamers, we bring a lot of expectations. Also, we bring limitations too. I never thought that I could press the top of the flashlight and turn the light on and off, because I just wouldn't assume that was something
Right.
tracked.
Right.
So, John, you build the props, and you take shapes and you put all the circuitry inside. Can you talk about what the constraints are, like what type of hardware goes inside a prop, like a gun or a flashlight, or even a door handle?
Well, everything, everything that the players interact with that has to be able to move and track, have to be trackable. So we've graduated from the old style ping pong ball reflective system to an active system. So all of our props have active LEDs that self-identify, that the cameras can tell what object and where it is. Also, our system, the ones that have to do things, like our flashlight, for instance, and the gun, for instance, it has to be able to tell the system when the trigger's pulled, when the light is turned on and off. And so we have an Arduino set up inside there that has a Wi-Fi that communicates with the backpack and with the camera system, so that it lets the system know, okay, trigger's been pulled, let's do a muzzle flash. And that way, there's that much more interactivity. Press the button, the flashlight turns on, flashlight turns off, that sort of stuff. So, and it's all, the gun, for instance, is probably the most complicated or challenging one, because it's such a compact piece. So we have to fit battery, 2 circuit boards, switches, LEDs, all that sort of stuff has to be crammed into this little tiny space. And, but it works. And we have a little bit more space in these things. Our smart plank, we call it, has its own tracking system and battery system, so that it can be moved whichever way you want. And as you walk over and it twists and wobbles, it's all tracked by the system, and it's all integrated into the world.
You mentioned, you asked me if I missed my hands, but the first thing that you guys give you is a prop. You get a flashlight.
That's right.
Right off the top of the bat, which I think sort of takes the place of a hand controller.
Exactly right.
In some respect, it gives you agency in some respect in the world,
Right.
because you can now interact. And so I think, do you agree that having these in the world is crucial to the immersion level?
I think it really is, because the more things you touch and the more things you can control and interact with, it really immerses you into it and tells that lizard brain this is real.
Yeah.
And it aids with proprioception as well, right? You know how difficult it is when you're in VR and you don't know where your hands are, and you really have to, picking up those controllers, whether it's touch or the wands, how often do you as if your eyes are closed, right? It's really hard. But once you even have one object in your hand, how difficult is it to reach for the doorknob? Like, personally, I had the gun in my right hand, and I went to with the doorknob with my left, no problem, right? It just aids in sort of oh, okay, I know where this is in space, I know where my arm is. The mind is able to sort of connect those things so seamlessly. So, yes, I agree. I think it's going to be absolutely crucial that we have props. Not always going to be, of course, guns and flashlights, but very early on, props are so helpful in helping you the sense of the body and where it is and moving you through space. Because I think that's what's really different about this. It's not really a video game. It can be. We can always put scores against it. We can always make it multiplayer. But it's really about putting a body through a space. And as much as we all love video games, as much as we've been playing them for years, this still feels very, very different than going through a Tomb Raider or an adventure-style experience. I really do feel that sense of my body and where it is. And so I find in that sense so much more compelling and immersive than really anything I've even done in a video game.
I imagine one of the challenges of this is, even though you have a lot of space, you want to make the space even bigger, feel even bigger.
Right.
So what are the ways that you're not using redirected walking, but what are the ways that you can make a 40 by 60 feel like a 40 by 100 by 100 by 100?
Well, it's interesting because you can play with people's perceptions of where they've been and where they're going. because we want them to really go on an adventure. We want them to feel like they've explored a really large space. So we have some other ones that we're developing where you actually will end up going back over locations you've already been. You
Retrace your steps.
Retrace your steps is the word I'm looking for. You wander through it, and then you can retrace your steps so that, but you're in a different level maybe, or you're in a different part of it, and you don't realize that you've just gone back through something that you already went through.
The elevators is really the example that we have in here. Like, hopefully you guys felt like you actually went up a floor. You actually went up in the space,
Yes.
right? And you really did get this feeling of like, I went up, and there's no reason we couldn't turn you back around across the plank and have another plank, which you think is to a different part of a different building or something like that, and have you go through the experience from a different direction.
I feel like I go up in VR if I go in an elevator. But
Yeah,
but
that's-
to have the rumble and to
Yeah,
be able
and
to
the
hold
fan.
to
Yeah.
have the fan and to hold
Yep.
the railings, it just adds to the experience.
Yeah, it was funny. You were commenting on like, how's the cameraman going to be able to follow me as I go up in the elevator?
Right.
Yeah.
It's something about going up and down in VR that's very different than going left or right. It's so much easier to fool us as human beings, and we don't really find it as nauseating or troubling to go along that y-axis. And so,
But cockpits in general have shown to be, a comfort zone for
yeah,
people.
because they have that peripheral, that constant sense of there's a periphery
Yes.
to that vision.
And I feel like your elevator does that
Does
to
that.
some degree.
Yep.
And I wonder if the elevator isn't like the most minimum, the smallest scale vehicle that you could imagine, and you could actually get into other vehicles. Have you guys thought about that?
Oh, sure.
Getting into cars or
Yeah,
other types of
automobiles,
things?
Yeah,
motorcycles even.
we have a white space that John mentioned where we're just trying different locomotion mechanics just to see if we added some locomotion to this environment, is it jarring, right? Because you're so used to just walking and having a one-to-one mapping
Yeah.
between your natural movement in the world and in the digital world, that if we add something like a standard, we've got the small local teleports that most games use nowadays, would that be a little bit jarring? We don't know. So we're going to, we just have to experiment and put people through it, because this is completely new. No one's really sort of tried this before.
And would that break your one-to-one mapping for your
Would it?
other things,
Yeah.
your other props?
Yeah.
Now, you had an operator here give us the backpack and the headset. How much operator involvement do you want to design? Is there going to be a dungeon master type person placing props or moving props to make spaces feel bigger?
Yeah, we have to have operators in the system because, like, the gun has to be replaced into its location, and any other props that people interact with that get picked up and walked around have to be replaced. So there's a certain amount of staff that has to be in the booth, and then you need people outside taking gear on and off and helping people get started in the game. But currently, our booth runs with about 4 people.
Right, and we definitely want someone that they have an important role in the introduction to the experience. When you get put on the backpack and you're in that sort of space, you always look around, what's going on. And the same thing when you come out of it. There's a real chance to have sort of an emotional high point as well, and you want to be able to take it off and have that final human interaction. Hey, how did it go? How was the experience for you? And so the operators are going to play an important role, but we don't want them to have the freedom to fundamentally change the experience. There's not going to be any sort of startling or jump scares. They're not going to be shaping your experience. Those emotional beats really are going to be designed by the developers, and so we want the same emotional experience to be largely the same for everyone, and they're there to just sort of guide you through it and make sure nothing too scary or what happens, and so that's about their role.
How do you add a replayability to this? If someone's paying, $10, $20 to go through, there's the laser tag analogy, but laser tag, you can always go back and have a different fun experience with friends, social.
But it's
Right.
always the same environment.
Right.
Yeah.
It's always the same environment, right? And that's the beauty of having that digital expression, is that you can map on different environments on that same space. So it wouldn't be too hard to have, a red pill, blue pill moment on that first door, right? Where you've got the gun and now you've got to decide, are you going to go and look for maybe someone who might be tied up, or are you going to go and help the police? And you make a decision and you open that door, but it's literally going to be the same physical environment, but now you're actually, mapped onto something different. And so you could go through one of it and you can come out and you go, wow, that was amazing, but what would happen if I went through something else? And so it would be quite easy to literally set up a left and right door that both led out into the same hallway, right? But once you go through that doorway, one is lava caves and one are ice caves, and you're going through the same environment.
Or if you go to a go-kart track, like location go-kart tracks, they have different tracks that they make just by opening up different,
Right.
turns that
Similar
can
idea,
combine
yeah.
tracks.
Yes.
But it all still goes around
exactly.
and it comes back to the same start.
From a video game perspective, something that I definitely want to get us to is procedural content, right? I don't want something that's hard-coded and very bespoke that you go through once, you're like, okay, I'm done, I don't really feel motivated to go through again. But imagine if you're sort of going through looking for objects in the environment, and at the end, you sort of combine those objects in an interesting sort of procedural way, fireworks show or something like that, and you sort of orchestrate an amazing experience. And then when you come out, we say you found 6 of the 19. And you're like, what? There were 19 things. Oh no, I want to go in. I want to go in and find something else, right? That sort of stuff. But it is an entirely different experience, right? We have procedural content that you combine them in fun and interesting ways. You come out and you go, oh my God, what happened if I'd have found this or that or missed this Easter egg? So I think there's a lot of things that we can take from video games, traditional games, and even free-to-play games, and sort of the way they reuse content in interesting ways.
Or scoring. Everybody wants to get a better
Everyone
score.
wants to improve their scoring.
Yeah.
I don't know, sir, if we want to encourage sort of speed runs, as we did have one person put a knee through a wall. As they actually
They were running.
They ran across the plank, and they physically like put a knee through, and we kind of want to discourage that.
What about to Norm's point about laser tag being a social experience? Have you guys talked
Social
about?
is hugely important, right?
Are you thinking about that? Multiplayer
Absolutely,
experiences?
Yeah, we're working on avatars, so you'll have hands, you'll have feet, so and so when it's multiplayer, because we'd like to be able to run groups so that you can have groups doing experiences, multiplayer doing experience, and you have to have avatars to be able to see each other so you don't run into your friend when you're playing. And that way you can communicate, you can talk back and forth, you can help each other in the game, and so that's all in the works.
I mean, does that scale? I mean, the other analogy is escape rooms, right? Where people are paying a lot of money, but it's like 10, 15 people for an hour, which is very different than one person for 5-10 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
Is that a direction? Does this system scale
Absolutely.
for that?
Yeah, the beauty of the VR world is sky's the limit. You can come up with games that do single player going through an experience, or multiplayer going through experience, or multiple teams going through an experience. We've even talked about having locations, in Boston and San Francisco competing against one another in the game at the same time. So you could have teams in different locations doing events.
Asynchronous social, where it's score based, not necessarily wireless multiplayer.
Or interacting
Or
live.
interacting. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, down the road, I mean, we think multiplayer is extremely important because social is so compelling, right? Once you do something with another person, and we've all been that escape the room experiences when you have another team and they're like, oh, they're ahead, they're already on to the next clue. What are they doing? And just interacting with other people is itself its own sort of compelling experience where you could be in a very small space. You spend an hour in those rooms. That it's entirely possible we could have a very limited physical environment where we just gate you through some very compelling puzzles, and it's a very social sort of discovery, and you're not actually traveling that far. And that's something I definitely want to get to is if the only sort of compelling part is moving through a space, you get through that pretty quickly. So there needs to be reasons to stop and explore, interact with other people, and that's within the same experience. And we don't want to talk too much about right now, but we do have plans for someone outside of the environment. Right, all of us have phones, right? All of us have smartphones, and ways that how can we bring that into the experience, or someone outside of that knows what you're going through, sees where you are, and can interact in some way as well.
Like imagine the experience you were going through, and while you're going through it, he's playing the part of one of the drones that's shooting at you.
Right.
So he could be interacting and messing up.
Or
your game,
what if
for
Jeremy
instance.
had control of the lights while you were going through that experience, right?
Or if I was on the comms and I was assisting him, maybe there was
Exactly.
I could tell him
Right.
which route to take.
Yeah, exactly. And so, we definitely want this to be not just for gamers, for the hardcore. We want moms and grandparents and younger kids, and maybe they don't want to go through the experience, but if they can interact with someone who's going through it
That's interesting.
in a compelling way, we think it just opens up to a much wider group. And that's who we want to appeal to. We're trying to appeal to all ages and genders, and we it's not just for like the 17-year-old hardcore who want jump scares and shooting things. We want everyone to be able to participate.
Every family in every city.
And do you see this as built up like your own laser tag, go-kart like facility, or is this all going to fit into malls and theaters and be a part of other places where people are already at?
Yeah, this is really going to be a part of sort of existing structures and malls and in theaters that want to have sort of a unique lobby experience. And so it's not unlikely to be its own destination, sort of we have our own physical retail brick and mortar experience, you're going to get in your car and drive to us. We want to be a part of a larger experience, and that's the modularity is so important for that, for people to have sort of a unique shape and that we can come in and we can sort of customize something to that particular shape. And that way we can have multiples in different malls. I mean, ultimately they all have sort of the same sort of rough shape, so nothing too exotic. But within that, we can customize an experience and be in those different malls, and potentially could have something that's out on the parking lot, sort of thing, right? So if you wanted to do like we were at Maker Faire recently, there's no reason we couldn't put up sort of a 3-day experience at a Maker Faire and have a version of what you just went through out at a Maker Faire. So we could do that as well. Something that's very short and very temporary, 3-day, or something that's more permanent, multiple weeks or months.
But yeah, we're, we're looking to partner with location partners so that whether it's malls, theaters, colleges, military bases, whatever,
Yeah.
and so that they would have the space, they would run the space, and we're also looking at intellectual partners, movie producers, gaming companies, products, toys, that sort of thing. Anybody who has something that can be turned into a game or turned into an experience.
Very, very cool. How far is this away? I mean, you guys are running playtests right now. You have a demo prototype. You're
Right.
working, I assume, with third parties to create content. And when can people go to a mall and have a Nomadic VR experience?
Right, so we're going to be rolling out slowly just so we can learn, right? We're still very much in sort of a prototype phase where we're learning and getting feedback. And we want to have an installation that's outside, that'll be open to the public, hopefully very soon before the end of the year, but we don't want to commit to anything right now because this is completely new. We are just learning. And that'll likely be open to the public, but it might be on one specific location, and we'll work with that vendor, and it'll likely be invite only and sort of a beta, just sort of a learning environment. And then throughout 2018, that will be sort of the start to go wide thing. And the content's going to come from us, right? We need to learn first, then we need to build the SDKs, best practices, all that sort of thing before we roll it out to external developers. But we're getting tremendous reaction to this. I think already people are like, this is amazing, and it's only a 5-minute experience right now. And
How long do you foresee that becoming?
Probably 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay.
Somewhere around that range.
And that doesn't
It
mean
feels a lot longer when you're in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does, and that doesn't necessarily mean it necessarily has to be physically bigger, right? There could be a puzzle-like element to that antechamber that you go in, where we've got these 2 monitors. Those are a potential source of interaction with the player. There's dials on them and everything. That if we wanted to, it turns out that people are racing through an experience. We're getting feedback from our vendors saying, people are going through in 8 minutes, 10 minutes. Can you get them to 12, 15 minutes? It wouldn't be a complete rewrite to say, let's put a puzzle sequence in there, right? Let's put sort of an emotional beat in there where, something happens in the sky where they've got to sort of like notice something before they can move on. There are ways that we can be flexible and slow people down without having to do, going back to the physical environment. So for us, the next step is let's get it out. Let's get in a real physical world and learn all about like what happens when you just put it on people in the street. Do they put gum on the lenses? I hope not. Do they etch their initials in with their car keys? I hope not. Do they yank on the cords? Right? All the stuff that you just got to get it out to the public, right? And so in that sense, we're kind of a microcosm of the VR industry as a whole. You just got to get down and learn. And I think the VR industry is still learning. And I think that, us as a part of that, we're still learning. So we're going to go small, get it out this year, and just start learning from a small public test.
So, Norm, when I came out of this experience, I had the biggest grin on my face. I know we're supposed to be poker face critics and journalists here, but dude, this was one of the best experiences I've had in VR since first trying VR.
Wow. I had a big grin on my face as well. I'm sorry we didn't capture that on camera. And a lot of that was the surprise and delight. I think going into the demo, we both objectively knew the kind of experience we were going to get. Within the walls of that Nomadic setup between 40 and 60 feet, we knew they'd be tracking some objects. We knew they'd be trying to do some tricks to get us to make more of that space than is actually there. But
Right.
after just a minute of being in that space, I felt completely immersed.
Me too.
And a lot of that had to do with the things they were tracking.
Well, and just the fact that everything was actually in the real world. So one of the things I got in there, I wanted to touch every wall, and I wanted to feel every railing, and just to see how far they went. Like if something had a curvature in VR, was it also curved in the real world? And I would have forgiven anything that wasn't there because I don't expect to see that. I'm used to an at-home experience, and you don't get that. Everything's it's just empty space.
If you see a counter space, you're not going to lean on that.
Right,
in
exactly,
VR.
exactly. And if I saw the table and it was slightly more ornate in VR than it was in the real world, I would have forgiven that. But they actually went as far as I tested. And it's a wonderful, wonderful experience to be able to feel VR.
Yeah, and a lot of that can get out of hand because they have to add tracking markers to every one of these objects, from the cart to the television to the flashlight you're holding. And the tracking system isn't something that they developed using the OptiTrack tracking system,
Right.
but they still have to engineer the props to work and have the right arrangement of these IR emitters and the batteries and have activated buttons. That's not an easy fabrication challenge, which they're taking on.
That's true, and if it's locked down, it has to stay still. Like it can't move at all, or else somebody could get hurt.
Yeah. So the demo experience itself, is about a 5-minute experience. You get to poke out a window. They do all the tricks we've read about in terms of blowing wind in your face, having a furnace with some radiating heat. Let you open a drawer, but everything was just so satisfactory. It was so pleasing to be able to open a doorknob and be surprised that even though our hand isn't tracked, to see the door handle actually turn and to hear the slam of a door behind us as we closed it. Like, that was amazing. And the question is, can they make a variety of experiences
Of course they
with
can.
this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, what is the Lego toolbox, the sandbox that they're going to build? If it's just going to be guns and flashlights and cabinets, like, what is that array? You have to engineer all of those different things.
That's true, and the doors have very simple sensors on them. Yes, the doorknobs are tracked, but that's all wired in there, and they move and they're tracked. But it's the things that are unwired, like the pistols and the flashlight, that have to have transmitters and interactivity. There's buttons to push on them. You're right, it does get more and more complicated. But the stuff that I found most compelling was probably the plank.
Yes.
Which is just a piece of wood with some trackers in it, which maybe is not that engineering too difficult to imagine, but wow, in VR, when I saw that, I burst out laughing because I said, they want me to be scared. They want me to actually do something that's challenging.
Did you think you weren't going to be scared?
I did. I went in there and I said, okay, I'm curious to see how this is going to feel. Like, what they're going to make me see something that I wouldn't imagine could exist in this small space. They're going to let me touch walls that are in VR, and that's going to be awesome, and it was. But I didn't expect to be pushed to any kind of fear threshold, and it wasn't like it was a jump scare.
No.
They're just asking me to be brave.
Yeah.
And so I walked up to that thing after laughing, and I slowly crept up to it, and then just decided to go for it. And I went for it.
And the fact is that you had to decide to go for it, because even though, again, objectively, that plank there's not a big pit underneath it.
Yeah, to
they
be
didn't
clear,
build that out.
there was a 60-foot pit beneath it.
in the virtual space, yeah. And the plank was just on the ground, and they did some really smart things of making it wobble by having it lifted off the ground just a little bit, and just feeling the plank wobble underneath your feet and seeing that virtual model
And it's
also wobble.
And it's tracked one-to-one.
And it's tracked.
Yeah.
That was really, really
So you
compelling.
kick the plank a little bit, and it actually moves, and it actually starts to fall off a little bit. And you think, oh my God, I'm going to lose the plank. Fantastic. Also, the elevator.
Yeah.
So you step onto an elevator, you press a button, and for all I knew, I was going up. I mean, the thing started rumbling. They're blowing a fan down on me. It was just enough. It's like VR's full of these thresholds that once you pass, it feels real. And these are the inputs to my senses that I needed to make me believe this was happening.
It was things like the elevator that really got me excited about the potential of location-based VR, because they're not using things like redirected walking to make your turns actually seem small. That's a real tough computational challenge. But knowing that if they can make you feel like you're going up or down, they've effectively doubled or tripled the actual physical space they have. Now, the question is, how much of the rearranging do you have to do within a single experience, right? Because if you're going to add all these props, like the cabinet, the window, the door, and you want someone to go up to the next floor and still use that surface area, there's going to have to be an operator that's going to have to move stuff around, or they have to design that game to maximize the surface area of that 40 by 60 space.
That's right. You could always imagine things out beyond the borders of your environment. Transforming. Like you could have a shooting range, and you maybe the levels you transition using an elevator. You walk right out to the exact same shooting range.
Yeah.
But what's beyond the barrier might be an alien world. It might be a carnival shooting range.
Purely virtual. You're never going to touch that part. That's not
Exactly,
tangible.
exactly.
But everything tangible within the confines of those walls, you want to make that versatile and repeatable and interesting.
Yeah.
And in a way that you can come back, do the experience, and come back maybe right after or come back 6 months later and still want to do it. The analogy that I really think is going to work for them is the escape room model, which is to get something social, get someone to design a long-form puzzle-solving experience. The build out of an escape room isn't necessarily very complex. Yeah, they have to design puzzles, they have to put in furniture, but the satisfaction I get is the interactivity. How I can puzzle solve in VR, or in an escape room, apply that to VR where you can break the rules of physics, you can put things in and have things tracked. There's so much possibility there.
Do you imagine that would work even in a single-player experience?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I think I definitely want the multiplayer.
I do too. I love that. I love the multiplayer aspect, even of laser tag.
Yeah.
But going in with someone and working cooperatively, that's always been my favorite part of video games anyway, is doing things together, and each of you have to turn the switch at the exact same moment, or you have to, direct somebody, they can't tell where they are. That, in this, would be fantastic, and I would love to see a multiplayer experience come to life. That's not their first priority. They realize the power of that.
Right.
But they're saying that's going to come maybe phase 2.
Yeah, and it seems like their priority is just to get this out there, to learn the lessons, because there aren't many of these location-based VR experiences out there.
Are there any beyond the Void?
There's the Void, and I guess you can say the roller coasters where you have the Gear VR
That's true.
headsets. Those are location-based experiences, and those are very controlled, and people have been loving those. But to get something set up in a mall and design a modular system that can be franchised out and set up in theaters and malls all around the world, that's really ambitious. To do it modular, I think they've shown that can be done. The fact that you can have a scaled level. I mean, I guess it is the version of Job Simulator where, at home, it's a difference between having a 2x5 area versus a 10x10 area. And for here, it's the difference between having a 40-foot by 40-foot area and having a 60-foot by 60-foot area.
Yeah.
Scaling that experience as well.
The other difference is when somebody leans on a table in this, they don't actually fall over.
Right.
Yeah, which happens, it's kind of funny. You can find many examples on YouTube of people falling over in VR.
And another question is, how much replayability is there? Like, is this just a novelty of walking across a plank?
Don't you think that this has far more replayability than an escape room, for instance? I mean, especially because it's skinnable. They could create completely different experiences using the exact same architecture.
Right.
Not to mention difficulty levels. Maybe that plank only exists, or the pit beneath me isn't as terrifying at an easier skill level. And maybe if I want to advance, maybe there is a score-based thing or unlockables. I don't know. But it seems like there's a lot more potential for replayability because of the software component.
A couple years ago when Will and I did that virtuality demo at SwissNext, a research institution that
you passed a
torch
right?
to each other, and that was multiplayer. And they also had an experience where we walked through a maze, right? And one of the lessons we learned from that was that we could walk through. They could they create corridors and make a small area feel much larger by not showing you the full area. And that if you're on the confines of a 20-foot by 20-foot room, but you're walking for 10 minutes in a maze because you're trying to find your way out, it'll feel like a much bigger room. And it worked because my brain naturally doesn't want to pass through virtual walls. Here, because I'm going to get accustomed to real walls being there, I'm wondering if that's going to be at odds with the natural advantages of having virtual walls. Can they combine virtual walls with real walls?
You're right. Once people expect real walls, it's going to be hard to take them away.
Yeah.
On the other hand, people naturally don't want to walk through them. So if maybe it's not a part of the pathway, they can add them. I'm not sure.
Right.
They can certainly make virtual obstacles that you have to shoot through or throw things through, I would imagine.
Or negative spaces. That's what that plank was over, right? Even though there wasn't a real negative space
That's
there.
much easier to transform into something else, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So how much would you pay for, say, this experience? How much would you pay for this 5-minute experience on location?
I think about $5.
Yeah, me too. I would say that's about fair. I desperately wanted a longer experience. After this was over, I said I was hoping there was more to it. This isn't what you'll experience once this comes to life. This is just their tech demo. But I want a 3 times as long experience. I want a 15, 20-minute experience, and I would probably pay $10 for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that remains to be seen. Like this whole question of the business model, is this a chicken before the egg kind of thing? Because they're creating a tool set to create a business with, and they're hoping that people will take their tool set and do so. Use spaces that are maybe no longer profitable for whatever reason and fill them with this tech. Who knows how much that's going to cost? That's going to be a big investment. And there's no proof yet that people will come if you build the Ark.
There's definitely market research and based on like how much space costs and what people do at malls, how much they want to spend. And I think they're going to let the economics of things like escape rooms and laser tag and go-karts kind of kind of define how lengthy or how involved or how collaborative a multiplayer experience they have in general. And that's yet to be seen. We don't have those numbers, and it'll be on them to make a system that can quickly adapt if one thing isn't working, just so they can sustain itself. Because I would love to see this in a bunch of places. I want to see location VR be a thing. I'm sold. I don't have that space in my house.
Well,
I don't have all the tracking.
Driving away, we were talking about how could you do this at home? You know, it wouldn't be a product, but if you were desperate enough, you could use maybe the Vive pucks, get enough of them, and create enough structures and create an approximation of this kind of experience at home. Because once you feel the real world, once virtual reality becomes tangible, it's something you want to experience again.
Absolutely. And that's it for us this week. We'll be back next time with more demos, another interview, and more showcases. But please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and Jeremy and I will see you next time.